What up, Misfits? Welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. My name is Chris, and together we are going on a journey. Now, Misfits, here's a real quick disclaimer. This episode deals with a little bit of mature content that, while I think needs to be discussed with young children, it needs to be done in a proper way. There's no foul language or explicit content, but the subject matter might be a little bit much for young ears if you're listening with your kids around. So I'll give you a few seconds to pause before I introduce my guest. T minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time for liftoff. Misfits, if you know me, you're probably aware that awareness about sex trafficking is a purpose I feel pretty strongly about. There's a discussion that needs to be had regarding the topic that might be uncomfortable, but it needs to be had nonetheless. A stat you may not know is that 1 in 3 young girls will experience sexual abuse in their lifetime. That stat for young boys, 1 in 5. Here's another one. In a study by Purdue University, 85% of women arrested in this country for prostitution reported a history of childhood sexual abuse. My guest tonight aims to reduce that number. She has a story that led her from childhood abuse and teenage promiscuity to bringing women out of this hellish, abusive prostitution environment to one of love, empowerment, and community. Elizabeth Fisher-Good is the co-founder and CEO of Selah Freedom and the Selah Way Foundation, an organization that helps free women from the sex trade and provide a safe housing environment for the victims of this life. Since 2010, her work with the organization has freed over 10,000 women from sex work and prostitution and has created demonstrable policy change across the country as well as around the world. Elizabeth has recently written a new book published through HarperCollins, Groomed, Overcoming the Messages That Shaped Our Past and Limit Our Future. And she's been an advocate and speaker and leader in the field of sex trafficking awareness and prevention for over a decade. We discuss the surprising and unlikely themes of the book, which is less about sex trafficking and more about the grooming by those around us, which can lead to the proclivity to create the trafficking trade in itself. We also discuss how the Selah Way Foundation was able to incorporate the programs into law enforcement agencies around the country and enact real world policy changes in America, and the ways that people are groomed for appearance and visibility, judgment, and finances. Her new book, Groomed, Overcoming the Messages That Shaped Our Past and Limit Our Future, is available now wherever books are sold. Misfits, please welcome Elizabeth Fisher-Good.
Playing the Misfit Heroes podcast.
Fisher-Good, welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. Girl, you have a story, and I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here, Chris, and the title is fitting, so thank you.
Well, Misfits, if you don't know, Elizabeth is CEO of the Selah Way Foundation, an organization that helps fight human trafficking and sex trafficking, both in the United States and around the world, from what I understand as well. And I'm really excited to talk to you. I think you got a great and inspirational story. Let's introduce people to you a little bit. So you're also the author of a book called Groomed. Groomed,
Yep.
Overcoming the Messages That Shaped Our Past and Limit Our Future. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about your organization as well. But let's introduce people to you a little bit. What is the Selah Way Foundation, and what exactly do you all do?
Okay. Well, to help you with context, because I know you're going to say she's the CEO or was the CEO of Selah Freedom. So just to give your listeners, because the two sort of go together, I was for a decade. I'm a co-founder of both Selah Freedom and Selah Way Foundation. And Selah Freedom is a Chicago and Florida-based organization, one of the top models in the country for anti-sex trafficking, safe housing, different arms of that. But when we launched that a decade ago, we had a vision that one day we would have this umbrella that not just was over Selah Freedom, but through the last decade, we've seen who the leaders are in this movement. Like some of the top non-competitive, don't have that competitive spirit, but rather that DNA that we need to lock arms and be one impenetrable army, for God, that together you're better. And so now I'm the head of the Selah Way Foundation, which unites not just Selah Freedom, but right now we're focused with 5 other leaders, I think right now, actually. And each one is hitting a different piece of the pie, and we're all coming at it together, though. And we're coming at it from housing on a domestic scale. Selah Freedom's that model. On an international scale, we are uncaged out of Romania, and housing model out of that all through Europe. And then we have a healthcare training arm and a law enforcement training arm. And it's all systemic change, though, because if you don't change an entire healthcare system, an entire law enforcement, state's attorney, the whole judicial system, you have to get everybody to understand that these girls are victims. And that's sort of the whole buy-in behind the whole thing. And then it rolls into, we have prevention, like how do you get ahead of it so that one day we don't need all of this saving these poor women that have been lost forever in this horrific crime, but rather now we have prevention. And so I could share more about that, but it sort of all tees up from my personal story why it all makes so much sense now.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people don't recognize that, you just hear this sort of catchphrase, human trafficking, and it's just sort of a
Yeah.
buzzword nowadays. But what you just mentioned is like this massive, overtaking. Um, let's
Yeah.
let's take it back to your story first. Let's take it back to the beginning. So, um, I read a good bit of your book, and you really had a lot of things happen starting with your childhood. Can you go into your story a little bit?
Yeah, I am extremely qualified and credentialed to be the head of this organization just because the root, and I think what listeners need to understand is the root of sex trafficking is the same root as a lot of other. It's like there's this best kept secret of childhood sexual abuse. And out of that root and that secret, I would say Satan comes to steal. If he can't get us in the womb, he'll come to steal a destiny or an identity by 3, 4, 5 years old, because when sexual abuse enters a child's life, everything, their worldview is just shattered. So I'm sort of textbooked for the story of what a sex trafficking survivor. I didn't get trafficked, thankfully, but I could have been. All the different pathways that come out of it a lot of times start with this root. So my personal story now makes so much sense to me in the context of, what I've seen over the last 10 years. We've worked with 8,500 survivors. And my story, church girl, I had my family member accidentally shoot and kill my sister when I was 7.
Oh my goodness.
And so that sort of brought this secrecy. Like no one spoke. Everyone was like, my sister was gone. No one said her name. And there was almost this shame because the person that did it, it was an accident, but that heaviness there. So it's like my world by the time I was 7 went very silent because my sister was like everything, 9 years older than me, my nurturing caretaker. And so she was just removed and everyone else was just sort of paralyzed. And so I had like one beautiful idyllic getaway still every summer. I was raised in Chicago, but every summer we had a farm in Arkansas and a lot of family there. And my mom had grown up there. And that was where I experienced sexual abuse, molestation. And it was with someone at the hand that I never would have saw it coming. And so that's why, like with our prevention program, we're so passionate about helping kids understand how to have a voice and to speak up, because I lived through it. And when it's somebody that you never would have thought would be doing anything to you, you love them more than anything. Then all of a sudden at 10, 11, 12, for me, it was when I was that. It wasn't as young as 3, 4, 5, like many, many girls are. But it happened unexpectedly. It was on the way to church. I was there for the summer, hadn't seen them in a while. And he's like, wow, you've really grown. Even had a nickname for me my whole life. So used the nickname, then just sort of started groping me, grabbing me, then happened more in the car on the way to church, going under my skirt. And the silence, it just silenced. And I couldn't, I couldn't stop him. He was looking at me with such a weird look of power. And as a child, it's bizarre. You think you'd be like, hey, knock it off, and some people are trained up to be like that, but I couldn't say a word. And you just proceeded. And I went into the bathroom and I was like, when I got to church, I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? And I'm crying in the bathroom, and literally, goes up, takes the stage for worship. And my other, I had a real uncle there. That was actually my uncle. And I went to sit down by him finally. And when he went to put his arm around me, I jumped, because in that moment, everything
Oh my
changed.
goodness.
When something happens, it's just like a gateway's broken and then you don't trust. And I never said a word. And then it progressed into different things in my life. Like my parents got divorced. I didn't know, that there was a lot of reasoning behind that was sort of shocking as well, and just sadness. But that I didn't talk about either. Like all of these losses over the years, things stolen, like in a second they're stolen. When someone dies, it's in a second. When you have abuse, it's in a second. And so I went on, and when I look at the girls that we've worked with in trafficking over the years, the story sort of goes along with what happened to them. And that's why the book is helpful for all women. It's just very, very helps to unpack our stories. But I didn't feel good about myself. I had so much shame because for some reason, when things happen to us, you internalize the shame and you feel like it's you, you're dirty. And so then I was exposed to alcohol as I was getting into high school. And for whatever reason, I just got blackout drunk and ended up in places and I got raped. And then, once so much is taken from you, you just don't even care. And I went into this promiscuity. And I look at the girls that we've worked with at Selah over the years, and they have that's the stats tell us. So for those that don't know, it's like they're abused when they're little. They can't handle it anymore. They usually do something to act out or run away. Often if they actually hit the streets and run away, within 48 hours, a little girl running from her home bedroom where a dad shouldn't be doing that, within 48 hours, 80% of them are approached by a predator.
Wow.
And they're lured in like, hey, I bet your parents didn't know how to love you. I'll love you. Just like the guy's handing me a drink at a party. Hey, you need to relax. You're so cute. And then before I know it, I wake up in a bed, not knowing what happened. And then that became my way of life. These little girls are on the street and they're approached by a man and he's like, I'll take care of you. One little girl said she was 11 and she ran away and a guy said, I'll give you $10 if you have sex with me. And she's like, oh my gosh, it's not my dad. I was going to be able to buy McDonald's. She thought it was going to be awesome
Wow.
because she'd been used that way. So my story is, it didn't lead to trafficking, but it led to a lot of pain and a lot of years to climb out of that dark hole. But compassion now to understand and, spread awareness for this could happen to any little girl.
Yeah, I mean that's ridiculous. How that happened.
That's
Uh,
ridiculous.
I mean, it's just it just amazes me. I don't think a lot of people recognize how this in particular happens. You see stuff on TV and you see like an episode of 24 and somebody gets yanked into a van and then oh that's kidnapping and that's what human trafficking is, and that is not what it is at all. That stat that you mentioned,
No.
48 hours is just mind blowing to me.
And it's like a slow fade, and a little girl or a little boy is groomed. And that's why we have curriculum now for kindergartners, teaching them how to have a voice. Because if you're groomed and you're used or you're spoken to in the wrong ways, you just start letting more and more in. And before you know it, you don't think you're worth more. So these girls that you see that look like this today, if you do a time progression over 7 years, because they're typically in the life for 7 years, sold 15 to 40 times a day.
Wow.
So that little 12-year-old 7 years later, that's not who she was meant to be. That's not who she was. Yeah, it's not her destiny. So we've helped transform many, many, many thousands over the years.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about your foundation. So, I mean, what's the history of the foundation? How did you get started in this industry? Because I know you said your personal story, sort of
Yeah.
led you to that. But I mean, how did you get so deep into this topic?
Yeah. Well, no, it would just be God because I moved from Chicago to Florida with one goal. I had been an area pastor at Willow Creek Community Church. I'd been like one of those overdo it ministry girls, exhausted, raising my kids, volunteering endlessly. And we moved to Florida, and my one goal was to do nothing. I was like, what would it be like to just live by the beach and do nothing?
Right.
That didn't work. But we were here for a year and just, I was involved in some event and they needed an underdog charity. And they were like, Elizabeth, go, you need to head up a philanthropy committee. You're new here with fresh eyes. So this was when I had moved to Sarasota, Florida, which is Siesta Key, Longboat Key, immense wealth, beautiful,
Yeah, it's a
beautiful.
beautiful area.
And yeah, and I started asking, like, what's an underdog charity that's not overly funded? It's a really philanthropic community. And they said, well, how about the fact this is 10 years ago? How about the fact that our local children are being sold for sex? And I'm like, what? I'm from Chicago. We're like, we're mafia, we're shooting. Like, we know, like, what are you talking about? And they went on to share the stats I shared with you. And then once they run away, they're on the streets for 7 years. And I'm like, what? And they went on to say, like, there's over, it's close to 500,000 American children every year are sold into sex trafficking and bought by our own people. And, we think it's only an international problem and we think that it's a white van or the movie Taken, but that's 10% of it is abduction. I mean, the other percent is a slow grooming where you don't even know that he's not your boyfriend and you're just so used to having sex with these people because that's all you've ever done. And that's what a lot of kids are being groomed in America to step into. So when I found out that was happening back in, gosh, it was 2010. And so I'm like, wow, like you, like, that's
Yeah.
disgusting. That's ridiculous. Like, what? And then all I said was, who do we write a check to? Like, done, we will do it. And they said, there's no one to write a check to. Everybody's acting like it's not happening. And I'm like, what? And so I went back to my committees, and a couple of people that are now my co-founders said, I think that's why we're led to this group. I think God drew all these people together for this event that really wasn't the purpose, but this birthed out of that. And that started Selah Freedom, which birthed the vision for the Selah Way Foundation, which birthed the different arms of how we've been able to save thousands of girls. And I moved here to do nothing, and I've never done more in my life. The last decade has been
Wow.
remarkable.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that, you guys have these relationships with law enforcement and things like that. I mean, how does that begin? Because I don't know. I mean, do you just walk into the police station and you're like, "Hey, I'd like to stop human trafficking." Like, is that how it goes?
Back in 2012, yeah, that's what you did, because law enforcement hated that population. I mean, think about it. We've all been raised to think, oh, that's just a hooker. Oh, that's just a prostitute. I raised my poor boys. I'm like, no, 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 that's a girl with the
Yeah.
story. Don't say that.
Wow.
That's a girl with a story. But back in the day, so you started, and a lot of times you'll see people that just like open a safe house for sex trafficking victims. If you don't have systemic change built around that safe house, if your law enforcement doesn't know that the girl's not the problem. When we started, what we realized was, I mean, we toured the country to see, are there any best practices out there? We picked up every best practice we could find, but it was non-existent. It was crazy. There was no laws back in 2011, 2012. And so you would find a girl, but then law enforcement would be throwing her in jail, and 3 misdemeanors. They used to arrest children. They called them child
Wow.
prostitutes, and that they were just trouble, and this was their choice, and they're bothering, begging these men and these poor men. I'm like, what
Yeah.
in the world? And so 3 misdemeanors. So if a child was 11, 12, and 13, she'd be arrested for minor prostitution back when we started this. And 3 misdemeanor arrests equaled a felony. So we had one girl that had been on the streets since she was 11, 12 years old, I believe. And by the time we got her at 18, she had 19
Oh my
felonies
God.
because she had been arrested as a child so often. So when we started, the cool thing is that, like, now a decade later, running the Selah Way Foundation, a lot of the people that were with us back here or that we've seen do great things over the years, they're now my ambassadors and heading up different arms of the foundation. So Kinsey Pentecost is just a super rock star. And back in the day in 2012, she's like, we got to bring the Nordic model to America. In Sweden, they just arrest the man. Like, we got to, you got to throw the man in jail. He's the buyer. We got to work on demand, demand, demand. And law enforcement has to wake up. And so, yes, in 2012, she and I walked into law enforcement agencies. We need to talk to you about. And they're like, who are you girls with your cute little shoes and whatever? You're like, what are you talking about? But it was like, we're so like a dog out of bone, because these little girls were not the criminals. These little girls had everything stolen from them. And law enforcement's like, no, that's the most belligerent population. We're like, you need to hear the backstory. And so we had brought in different training. There was a couple markets around the country doing amazing work way back in the day. There was one market really in Atlanta, one in Iowa. So we were able to bring in their law enforcement. And for whatever reason, we said, we're holding this law enforcement training. You guys all need to come. And all these different law enforcement agencies, where I just moved to Florida, they came, their chiefs of police and their, heads of the sheriff department basically said, do this. And it's like the scales fell off, but I think it was a movement by God, because you'll hear people say this around the world. 2010, 2011, they were drawn to this movement, and all of a sudden there's been this, like, scales are falling off. People are being able to see. And so we down in Florida were able at that time to create one of the first models. You have teen court or drug court. We created a court for the first time, and it was called Tyla, Turn Your Life Around, because prostitution court sounds ugly. And so the poor girls don't want to go to prostitution court, but Tyla Court, Turn Your Life Around. And we created a whole change in the state's attorney, judicial, law enforcement, of recognizing that these girls had been victimized and everything stolen. And so they would be able to come into a program like we created. And then we've got programs around the country that are able to be at that standard. And if a girl doesn't, instead of serving time for what would have been a crime, she comes to get restored back to who God created her to be. You know, girls come in, they're like, I didn't even know I'm musical. Like they didn't get to do what we do with our children. Try ballet, try this. And they come to us and they get to try all of that. And they get to learn what their gifting and their talent. And they're beautiful. They're resilient girls that were like throwaway. And the world was happy with them being throwaways. And so we awakened and changed the system probably between 2012 and 2016. It was like 2-3 laws a year being changed, and then they started being changed on a federal level. So now girls, the sad thing is in some places around the country, and now we're going on a global scale, laws are changed, but if training doesn't get there, roll call and street crimes, they don't know. Some good old boys are still like, just a child
Wow.
prostitute. So there's a lot of work to do because you have to hit every market. But we started really moving the needle. And now what's happening is on a global scale, the best practices that we built over the last decade, we also saw who some of the best leaders were over the last decade. So we've pulled a lot of them under, you know, this sort of like we built the foundation with the Selah Way Foundation and put all these pillars in place of rock star leaders that can work together. And so now collaboratively, we have a housing model that we perfected in America, but that looks different international. And there's a housing model called Uncaged out of Romania, and that's what we'll be scaling throughout, you know, the world. And it's just beautiful watching what God, he brought those that were willing. None of us knew what the heck we were doing. I feel like I got my MBA in not-for-profit management, but learned this
Yeah.
thing. And now, I mean, it's really the global. I mean, we were at the White House with only 100 people chosen to be there a year ago. Like it is, God has downloaded a formula for saving, because think about it. These are the least of these little children. Nobody should be doing this to a child at 3, 4, 5 years old, 8, 9, 10. And to just ignore them on the streets and say, oh, they're just that. Like no one's just that. If your daughter was keeping a secret, and that's what it starts from, keeping a secret. If you're keeping a secret, look what gets stolen. Satan has a
Yeah, I mean
field
that's
day.
just heartbreaking, and to think that to think that that's just a backward system that you were just mentioning, where they they don't even bother with the men. They're going right for the girls. I heard you mention the housing segment and everything like that, but actually, before we go even further with that, you know
Mhm.
the person that did this to you initially was, you said, your worship leader. I mean, that's got to be super traumatic for you, and those traumas that are developed around that. I mean, how does that affect you seem to be, very straightforward about your faith and everything like that. I mean, you couldn't have just snapped out of it like that. There had to be a journey inside of that faith there.
No, I mean, I am 52 years old. I am very
No.
old now. but but quite honestly, age doesn't, like, the beautiful thing, and we'll speak about my book later, but with the girls, we get them young, and now we have like the keys. We have all these resources. We, you know, because a lot of times people will be like, "Oh, let me help them. I'll love them. Let's just pray the blood of Jesus over them." That's not going to work, sister. Like, they don't even believe Jesus. Where was Jesus when their dad was raping them and then someone was dragging them to church? Like, a lot of these girls' stories, they came from homes just like me, but theirs just went way off the rails. Um, but the self-esteem part, for me, my personal story, I was such a Jesus girl when I was little. For whatever reason, Jesus got me very, very, probably to get me through my life, right? So I was like that Awana girl, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
do you know what Awana is?
Mhm.
The Baptist, you know. I grew up in Awana, so I was winner of sword drills. Like I was immersed in that. By the time I was 10, I was like girl of the year, Awana girl of the year when the Awana Olympics. So like I had this Jesus thing going on. And so I think even when my sister was killed, Jesus was so real to me already, and the rest of my family was so debilitated that Jesus was like my only friend. And for whatever reason, at a young age, I became a very big journaler. I had my first Holly Hobby diary that had a key. And I would just always cry out to Jesus. And so after my rape and then more just ridiculous promiscuity that you could pretty much call it all a rape, like the girls will say, well, I chose, you know, to let all these people do that. It's like, you chose it in a way, but you didn't even know you were worth anything more. You didn't choose it. You were so groomed into it. Coercion hits your brain, just like me. Why did I have all these years from 14 to 20 that were just black, dark, worthless? But as much as I felt worthless in the world, barely got out of high school, um, I journaled. And I was like, God, this isn't who I am. You know who I am. And it's interesting, even with our sex trafficking survivors, many of them have always loved God, but they didn't think he loved them anymore. And so I think it's getting to that reconciliation point. And so for me, like, for me, what was more appropriate was hitting counseling to talk about my sister, right? So I got to grieve my sister probably by the time I was 18, 19. I had some really good healing there. Didn't even tap this stuff. And what we always say is, we have some girls that have been thrown into rehab 18, 19, 20 times. They don't have a drug problem. But when you have a shame issue, and if your root is sexual abuse and your root is shame, or you're hiding something that was done to you, people are throwing money
Yeah.
at the symptoms. And I wasted a lot of years trying to deal with my symptoms. I had this addiction. And that's why you look at it. Like, in my book, I talk about whether it's a wealthy housewife from the North Shore of Chicago that can't stop shopping, or her husband beats her behind her hairline so she looks good at the gala on Saturday night. Like, we all come into holding our secrets from different things, but it's until we get that reconciled and that healing and that the shame. So like, my book now is a tool that gets to that root, but we hit the trauma straight on. Like, I have my master's in clinical psych, but you and I could sit down and talk about your past, and I could help you access it, and you'd cry and you'd tell me all the stuff you never told anybody. But talking about it alone really doesn't reset those neural pathways to get you to that freedom
Right.
place like you're talking about. Like, I'm now at a different place. I did a lot of years of just therapy, and I tell you what, just talking about it really doesn't heal you. Jesus has different ways for us to have our healing, and there's ways of neural pathway resetting. And I think you've heard of Dr. Caroline Leaf, and it's a whole different modality. And they do it in Europe more than we do it in America. But the combination of hitting the right stuff, because like when I do these groups with my book, and they're like freedom groups, and I do them with multiple people. And when one woman will, like, I'll always lead and I'll say everything. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, did she say that? We're going to go there. Like, what are we doing? And they're like, I've never said that. Or what happens a lot in life is people are like, well, I've told that person that, but I've told that person that. No one knows all my darkness. But it's when we have the ability to let all of our darkness come out, and everybody still look at us and love us. And then there's like different techniques of just, it is like a neural pathway reset. So I have all the tools. We have all the skills for over the last decade that we've learned. So probably when I started Selah, I could tell you I was not nearly as healthy as I am now. And the way that God brought us the resources, because we didn't know. It's like, I mean, I had my master's in clinical psych, but I wasn't looking to do this type of work. This is intense. But God gave us the keys. Every time we got to a next point that we didn't know what to do, he revealed the next key. And there's like this beautiful formula that I'm telling you. I was talking to, I had another podcast this week, and it's someone that went through some trauma, and she said, wait, because my book talks about you fake it for a while. And that's what I think a lot of us do. I mean, a lot of the church is walking around half awake because they don't want anyone to know what really happened on
Yeah.
Saturday night, or their pornography addiction, or, and we talk about all of that. And, kids now are addicted to porn by 8, 9 years old. And so we have to start talking about this stuff. So I think my freedom comes from just the normalization of it and helping other people have their awakening. And then it's just fun. People's like, how do you do that work? It's so dark. I'm like, no, dude, I'm on the fun side.
Well, yeah, that normalization definitely needs to happen. We won't get anywhere just by preaching to people. I think that there's definitely that. Obviously the preaching helps. Obviously that's the start of it, but you got to go. Yeah, you got to
Got to
go.
get
You got to go
here.
deeper
Yeah.
than that to really, people like to hide stuff, and people for some reason have this shame, just like you're talking about, that they just, Jesus lets that fall off, and that's exactly what you're talking about. So let's talk
Yeah.
about your book, Groomed. The interesting thing that I found about what I was reading about your book is that it's not some book about sex trafficking. That's the thing that kind of amazes me. We have this, again, you got that buzzword, sex trafficking, but that's not what this is about. So let's talk about Groomed. What exactly does being groomed mean?
Well, I think we've spoken a lot about what it looks like in the sex trafficking world, but my book hits it from many different angles, because I believe that God each of us, God says we're all born with a purpose. We all have a destiny. Before we were conceived in our mother's womb, right? He knew who we were, what our calling was, and we all have that. And then things happen along the way that crush that. And it's not always sexual abuse. That's 1/3. So typically it's 1 out of 3 little girls and 1 out of 5 little boys will have a secret of sexual abuse. So if that is a listener story, my book is it's stellar. I mean, I'm not bragging here, but I have a lot of great reviews.
I'm just saying I did pretty good, right?
I think God, the Holy Spirit wrote that book. I'm not taking any credit, but it's out of my own pain. I mean, I had a lot of pain, so I have some credibility with it. But it's not just sexual abuse, so it is perfect for that. But the thing is that many people weren't raised with that, and some were raised with physical abuse or verbal abuse, but some weren't raised with that. But some were raised with people that narcissistic mothers, narcissistic fathers. They were raised to always play a supporting actor role in their own life. They never got to really take the lead, figure out who they were created to be, because they were there to make another person's identity stay intact. And we step into those identities and those roles by the time we're 4, 5, 6 years old too. Like, so many things are imprinted on us when we're little that take us off of our destiny and off of our path. And the book starts out with digging into, it started with a secret. There's usually something in everybody's childhood that is a memory of their first significant loss, their first significant sadness, and getting to these places sort of brings up, and what if you never said out loud, there's something back there. So it just starts right off the bat, like, let's go into your closet, because it's not like to therapize, because I believe that can be an idol. If you're one of those people that's just in therapy your entire life, we're supposed to get the healing. I mean, the Bible talks about the prayer of a righteous man has great authority. Confess your sins, and the prayer of that righteous man has great authority to heal. So I think, Catholics get it through confession, but then it's a little broken. You don't really get that, if we did it right, confessing your sins one to another, confessing your secrets, confessing the things you're ashamed of, confessing what you've never said out loud, that you're afraid someone might look at you different if you tell them, or you've never shared what you saw this person do to that person. A lot of children are carrying things that they knew about their parents. A lot were just ignored and felt invisible. And so it's really helping people access, and then it takes you step by step through this. Really, it's a dynamic process of not getting stuck there, but there's some exercises that pull some stuff, release some stuff, and then it gets you into this place that we call the Selah. And that's where you really, once your stuff is up, that's when most people are like, oh God, I'm going to go get a tub of ice cream. That's just a lot.
Yeah.
But it sort of says, no, we're going to pause right here. Like, even if you need to put this book away for 3 months, don't just try to finish this book. It's not a book to be read like that. It's a book it's for you. It's like a gift to yourself if you want to go into the next threshold of where you're called in a more pure and better way. Because if you go through the steps in it, it gives you this really true, beautiful Selah to let that stuff come up, not to stay there. And it has so many diving off points to help you access things that people are like, I can't believe how you wrote this. I haven't thought of that since I was 7, and I can't. And it's bizarre, but things come up, and then it walks you through, like, the Selah is actually feeling them for a moment, not staying in them and paying for counseling every week of your life. I mean, don't get me wrong, counseling is great, but sometimes we just need to get up and out fully and in love with others, let it be heard. And then it walks through how to properly grieve it, to properly release it, to properly get to this place of a relaunch and a level that you've never seen before. And it's shocking every time I do it, because it ranges from people in their late 20s will do it. I have women in their 70s doing it. Some people are like, I'm done. They quit their jobs. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, people stay in situations. I'm like, this is not a book to leave your husband either.
Yeah, right.
Like, it's not any of that, but it's to recognize what you no longer want to be defined by. And so what's really cool, in one of the places it talks about doing a personal impact statement, because once something has been done to you or you've come into agreement with it, and like one woman, it was her sister-in-law. She was like, I have lived under this constant. It was like, she's been married 45 years. I'm like, but it's finally come out that she has accepted this certain pattern of behavior or relationship that she's like, I don't want that anymore. I want a different relation. And it's just bizarre. But in our program, we tell girls, once they get really healthy and cleared, a lot of them get to prosecute their traffickers. And so, yeah, when you go to court, it's something called an impact statement where they have their day in court, and we work with them to get them so healthy. We bring up this stuff that they never would have brought up the details. But if you don't bring up the details, you don't get to leave them behind. So these girls stand up, and like we had one in Illinois where the prosecutor, state's attorney, had been there like over 25 years. And our little 19-year-old was all trained up to give her impact statement. And she had been on the streets for like 7 years. And this trafficker did things that like you wouldn't believe. But what happens is with their impact statement, they name everything that happened to them. And he's sitting in front of them in his orange jumpsuit with his chains on. And there's an audience, witness. You need a witness. And she's saying, you did this, you did this, you did this. I mean, and horrific stuff being named. She said, but it no longer defines me, because now you're sitting here in handcuffs and you're sitting there about to go behind bars, and I am now. And then she goes on, reunited with my children, or I just finished college, I got my GED. And so she like claims what she is. And like people walk out of there like, oh, state's attorney's like, I've never in my 20 some years heard an impact statement. And it's sort of that same formula through my book. Like, guess what? You may have played this role, and whatever it is, like, women come on, we've been doing them on Zoom because COVID sort of happened right after my book came out. And I feel like God downloaded this like I have a 4-week and a 5-week program, a program you go through on Zoom. So I'll have like a woman from Alaska, a woman from Tennessee, a woman from Georgia. And so they're the anonymity too, that they don't know each other, but you go through this experience together, and you're saying this stuff that you never thought you'd say, but she's saying it and she's saying it. And all of a sudden you have this like, this braveness comes out, and it's a whole different level. And then they share their impact statements with each other, and they get up and they're holding their papers. They look like the girls in court. They're shaking, reading what they never thought they'd say. And they're like, and I am no longer, and they're going to go into, so people leave my group and go like run the world.
That is so powerful, like hearing about the people facing their
Yeah.
condemner, really, and just
Mm-hmm.
defeating that, and this it seems like a lot of this is
Yeah.
about discovering your purpose.
Yeah. And you know what? A lot of times, Satan, it's not something hugely significant, but like one woman, she had to leave and move from another country when she was little, and there was different things, and she just never had a voice. And so her even reading her is saying, and I'm mad when and she just acknowledged some stuff that she could see how it now played out in some of her other relationships. But she said, I have a voice, and I'm not going to just, and it's not like these people are just turning into like these witchy girls that are never going to be okay, but they have confidence and they know that they're worth their voice. And this woman was 71 years old, powerful
Wow.
woman, affluent family. But she's like, I'm taking this back and I want to know. And it was so it's empowering. And it's just so fun because you don't know what's coming.
Well, going back to your book, you said there's 5 different ways of being groomed. Um, can you go over just in brief detail those 5 different ways that you talk about?
Yeah. The first one is groomed for appearances. And so in appearances, and all of them, I've had different stages of them being mine because you play different roles, right? So groomed for appearances, I come from a family that my dad came over. He's first generation, and wanted to look good, wanted to fit in, wanted to blend, and our last name is Melendez. We didn't want to look Spanish, look American. And so like just knowing I would show up places and I knew I would disappoint him if I didn't look a certain way, or if I didn't look, he wanted me to look like country club and I looked like, I don't know, street kid. I don't know. Like I didn't have the look. And so as I grew up, I tried to look, but I always felt phony because I'm like, this isn't, but I got that role. And then I ended up getting married and playing that role. I was a North Shore wife, and I played a role a lot of the time, and I was groomed for these appearances. I remember one time when I worked at NBC, I worked in Chicago, and I felt so like some of them go together. There's another chapter called Groomed to be invisible. And that's when, I was the youngest of 35 cousins. I was the quietest of like a multi-ethnic racial. Believe it or not, I was the quietest. And yeah, um, I just never, and with my sister dying, like I remember at one point there was a wedding after she died, and I was 7, and all of the bridesmaids are all there. They left a spot where my sister would have stood, and then I was the flower girl because I was the youngest. And they just left a gap where she would have been, and it was just heartbreaking. And I just remember afterwards sitting in a chair in my, this big dress and just sitting by myself crying. And I remember one of the oldest cousins coming up to me and she's like, "What are you crying about?" And I'm like, "I miss Diana." And she's like, "You're too little. You didn't even know her." And she just walked away. And then I'm like, man, my grief really doesn't matter to people, or I'm really, and I've lived that out for a long time. And so like when I was going to work back when in my 20s, I was such a fake it till you make it. And you tell you what, if you keep faking it, you're really never going to make it. That I don't even know why that
Right.
saying exists. It's not about faking it. You get healed and you got to get real. But I would sometimes be dressed for work. My, job was on Michigan Avenue at beautiful NBC Tower. And I'd be driving down and I'm like, I just feel invisible. Like no one's going to see me today. I'd stop at Marshall Fields on State Street and I'd buy like a whole new outfit, new shoes. I just felt like when I walked in a room, no one saw me. Like and I think that that's what the enemy will work to do. Like, because I'm sort of not invisible,
No,
right? Like
no,
I'm not a
clearly.
person that you would, oops, don't he's on camera with me. But I really was, and I felt invisible. I acted invisible, but I think the enemy works hard when we're little to have, sometimes it's just one word someone says to you. Like that wasn't a big deal what my cousin said. She never thought about it again, but Satan used it to just steal a lot from me in a very weird way. And that's what comes up in these groups. Like things come up that you don't realize, like took territory, and many people don't do the work to like get that territory back. Like if I would have stayed invisible and stayed in my fake role and stayed in where I was in my 20s, and I didn't actually get free till I was 34. 34 is when I really, really, really had the full reconciliation breakthrough. But if I didn't, I probably wouldn't have said yes to the sex trafficking thing. We'd have these 10,000 girls that wouldn't have had their lives freed and changed. But I think what usually gets stolen from us is the very thing. And that's how the book ends, after it walks you through the different grooming. And I'll share more of the grooming examples. But after you break free of what you're groomed for and you're groom no more, man, like I'm free, then it almost shows that exactly what was stolen is really where your calling and purpose is. Like my voice was stolen for years. I was invisible for years. I'm on a platform now every day. Like I was born for having a voice, but if Satan could have kept me without my voice, guess what? A lot of people would have stayed, without me as an advocate. I'm a super misfit hero. But it's the overcoming. And so it's like, it's finding your true misfit parts, because those misfit parts are actually your calling. Like one of
Yes.
my children has a really strong personality and he's always arguing. And I said, you have the gift of edification and words, but Satan has your gift right now,
Yeah.
because you're using your words to hurt people. I know your calling, and I could see how beautiful it's going to be when your words are actually advocating. But it's being able to see that the opposite is what we're really supposed to be walking in. So it goes through more chapters like that.
I mean, you're clearly using your voice and you're clearly using your talent. I mean, once people discover what their purpose is, I mean, it's such a life changer. And you can talk all day about your faith, but that discovering your purpose, I believe it comes alongside your faith. I'm not going to say it comes separate.
It has to. No, it has to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Chris, it even and I think for your audience, like your listeners, it's not a one and done. Like what I can tell you is this interview I'm doing with you right now, if you had interviewed me last January when my book came out, would have been a total different interview. I wouldn't have had the clarity I have now. Like when my book first came out, I came out of a really difficult marriage. I was married 21 years, and it destroyed me in ways of confidence. And so somehow God used me to build this Selah empire that we've now created, the Selah way and everything that came before it. Um, But I was great on a platform talking about that and talking about what I was doing, but I couldn't talk about myself. And it felt, because I would get off and I would hear these words, the enemy would use the words, oh, did you get enough attention? It's all about you.
Mm.
Oh, did you get enough attention? Oh, did enough people tell you? So then I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want people to think it's about me. And so that's why when I had this agent who was asking me, like, you need to write, some of the pub houses are asking if you would write your story. I'm like, no, I can't make it about me. And I went through, this is what I want to encourage people. You're never like, it's not one and done. I had all these years of healing, but when it was about me, I thought it was self-serving, that people are going to think that I'm all that people think I'm bragging. Like, it makes me cry right now. Like, I didn't have the confidence to talk about myself January a year ago. And God, and that this last year, I remember I had one girlfriend, my book came out. She's like, and I had HarperCollins. I had all these assets. They wanted me to do all this stuff and self-promote. I couldn't self-promote because I thought it'd be self-promoting. And it started with a girlfriend saying, why are you hoarding your gifts? Like, your story is so powerful. Why are you hoarding your gifts?
Very much.
I'm like, I can't let it be about me. Like, she's like, it's not about you. It's God's story.
Amen.
So even in that, like in the last year, like even God, like, I feel like Holy Spirit downloaded this curriculum after my book came out. And that's what I'm saying. These groups are good. This book is good. And I feel like I didn't write it because I didn't even have the confidence fully to understand it at the time. And now a year later, I can tell you, I feel like, I don't know if you were ever into prophetic prayer. Is that on in your bucket list where people pray and pray?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I don't know. Different Christian audiences, right? But I don't know which stream I'm talking
Oh,
to,
you're good.
but I've had prophetic prayer over the years. And one of the prophetic prayers, which was so bizarre, is this man was praying for me, and he said, you are going to touch women in the deepest places, like the deepest places. He said, and I could see the trauma. There's so much trauma you've been through. He said, but the Lord's showing me like this plume, the old feathers that used to dip in ink and write with.
Mm-hmm.
He said, the Lord's showing me a plume, but it's like, he goes, it's really weird. He said, but it's like you're dipping it into your brain, like the blood, the trauma. And that's what's the Holy Spirit's going to pour it out, and he's going to write. And I think that's what's happened here, because I wasn't even in a confident enough place to promote my own story a year ago and the healing that I've gone through. So, anyone listening, like, be open to the next level healing. There's always more, and there's always new thresholds that as believers we have to cross if we're stepping into our destiny. So now I could talk to you like, my book makes so much sense. Like, I'm excited about it because I had more inner healing ministry and just stuff and people would start doing this book. And I swear to you, I wrote the curriculum on a plane ride, a 3-hour plane ride. I just couldn't write fast enough. It was just,
Yeah.
but the way it's ordered, I couldn't have made it up. It's bizarre. So I think that God has purposes in all of us. And yeah, I think my book helps unlock it, but I was groomed, one of the chapters is to endure. And I was groomed to endure. Like, I just could suck it up and I'm fine, I'm good. And, just heap it on me. And my hair was falling out by the time I got out of my marriage. Like, I was all right. I was used to it. But the chapters will just awaken different parts and different people. And
Yeah,
I
what you're
don't know.
saying totally makes sense to me. A common thing now is social media. And I'll be honest, I'm horrible at social media, like the worst, right? And but
Yeah.
it's so easy, particularly when you're doing a creative endeavor like this, like a podcast, and
Yeah.
you want people to hear it. My focus is I want this to be for God's glory, but I obviously want people to hear it. I don't just do
Right.
it just for myself for God's glory. This isn't just two people. And seeing the numbers and the number of likes and all this stuff on social media, I'm terrible at it and I'm so over it. But when you're first getting started with a podcast, that's something that affects you, and it literally it speaks to exactly what you're saying about being groomed for all of these things.
Yeah. It's hard to take a platform. And you know what? I think that we all have one in us. And it's usually the very thing that we feel we're inadequate in is where we have to step into. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned three out of the five groomed instances. What were the other two that you had left?
So, groomed for judgments. And that one is a big one. And that's, it gets a lot into being raised in the church, a lot of it, and legalism and the things that God hates. And How we I was the worst church lady. I mean, I was in church leadership since I was in my 20s, and I didn't get really healed to my 34. And by then I was already in a lot of positions I shouldn't have been in because it's very judgmental, but I think we're as judgmental as our sin is hidden. And so that's sort of what that one is about. And it gets into never vows. Like whenever, like, well, I was the churchy lady, the judgy church lady that was full of never vows. Well, I'll never get divorced, and I will never have a child on medicine, and that mother just needs to try harder.
Wow. Yeah.
Whoa, comes back at you. So usually we're judging out of wounds. When we have judgments, it's unhealed wounds in ourselves. And those unhealed wounds will have a way, we'll keep attracting that to us because we're putting energy in the offense rather than having released it and flowing in freedom and love.
And so much of that ties to, you hear about like hurt people, right? But it's, so many of those outgoing issues are incoming issues that we just don't even see the incoming about it. I totally get what you're saying too.
Mm-hmm. And then the last chapter is about groomed for, we were going to call it poverty mindset, and that's a big Christian thing. But my book, when I wrote it, I didn't even think it would come out as a Christian book, but HarperCollins picked it up in the Christian. So God knew it. Like, and so now I'm glad it is because, that is a poverty mindset. And I think Satan wants us to never believe there's enough. And, God is a God of abundance. He's has all the cattle and all the mountains and all the hills and valleys, and we tend to not believe that we're going to be provided for, and we tend to believe that there's not enough for me, and it's generational. I come from a long line of poverty minded, scarcity minded, and overcoming that, and it talks through different ways to look at that. And it's weird, like there's been pieces of me, like I've been able to lay it down in this realm, but then I didn't have it laid down in that realm. Like, oh, of course God's going to provide here, but he's not going to provide for that, and getting fully reconciled in what God wants is what God's going to fund, as a fundraiser. What God wants, he'll fund. He knows what needs to be funded, and he knows what he needs, what you need for your life. And yeah, so it walks through different stages of
Well,
that.
what I found interesting about the groomed for finance part that you were talking about is it's not only about money too, it's about your mindset behind it. And, I can't tell you how many times in my life that I've fallen to that. And I'm reading this stuff and it's just like, oh, when you get hit with something that just hits home so hard, you're just like, man, why'd I have to read this book? But but it's
That's yeah. I mean, people. I go to different events all the time with my book and with Selah, and I have one woman. She keeps coming up to me. She goes, I haven't read it yet. She goes, I'm just not ready to have all the change I know I'm going to need in my life. I don't want to open your book.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's great. It's super informational. I mean, it's a great read, and I love what you're doing. Going back to the Sail Away Foundation. So, what do these people that you're saving? What do their lives look like after the fact? Do you sort of bring people into your organization from that? I mean, does anybody choose to do that, or is that a thing at all? Or
Yeah, I think we have 8 graduates on staff at this point. And then we have one graduate. She's a worship leader in a church. I mean, it's just cool. It's like when you raise your kids. They come to Selah, and I always say by the time they come in, they're maybe developmentally 12. Because they might look 19, but they're developmentally. And so, try this. Are you good at art? Try this. Do you like this? And so they grow up with us. They typically stay the life. The span of the program is 3 years. And so they come in at 18 and they typically stay till they're 21, but then they have the opportunity to be mentors to new girls. They have the opportunity to come on staff. So our prevention arm, and I'd love to, before we close, talk about prevention and everything happening with that. But that's the big piece. Like many of them, what's so cool is some are on staff now and they're going into the schools. There's curriculum for K through 12. It's called Speak Up, helping kids have their voice, and it's mandated in Florida already. And there's a bill that's about to be dropped in DC to mandate it on a federal level, so kids are trained
wow,
to speak up. Because K through 12, like people are like, kindergarten, that's so young. I'm like, no, 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 believe me, kindergarten is not too young. Because if you're not talking about it, someone's in your kid grooming them. 1 out of 9 of our children now are groomed on social media. And, as we said, addiction to porn starts at 8 or 9. There are kids that are like doing selfies that would take your breath away at age 10. Like just the world of social media. It's like the Satan has a whole new playground. And so the things that I'm excited about now are our K through 12 program for the schools, but we have another under the Selah Way Foundation called the Cool Ant series. So if your kid's school, if you can't get them to teach it, if they can't open the school there, open that program there, the Cool Ant series can be downloaded as well. And that is something you use at home. And it's a way to talk to your kids, not in a scary way. It's just a way, like homeschool moms and different, they want a tool. And it's just amazing. And then with the Groomed, under, I have my ministry page now. It's called Free with E, so free with E, like Elizabeth.com. And we're building something for the church, because the women in the church have to get it, but the men have to. And so, like, often there's not these deep conversations. So there's just a lot of good prevention tools that are available that I'm so excited about.
Yeah, that's huge that you're getting that at the federal level. I mean, that's amazing, and it clearly shows that, this is an issue that has that much of an impact and that much of a need that they're allowing you to do that. It's not easy to put stuff in schools. And
I know. So everybody should be praying. It's supposed to drop it dropped last year, but then COVID hit and everything
yeah.
died, the bill. And so it should be dropping again. So people should be in prayer. And you know what the thing is, even if it doesn't drop, like if you go, probably the easiest way to get in is my website, which is freewithe.com. Like if you go in there, you could see, like, you could read about the Sail Away Foundation. You could learn about this curriculum. You could go to things for downloading on how to protect your own children. There's all these tools right there and things to check on your phone and your settings and different ways that parents can just feel empowered, because it's important for them to learn how to protect their children, because this is Satan's coming on strong.
And it's so difficult. It's a difficult conversation to have, but so necessary. So necessary. I don't think there's so many parents now that just don't recognize how prevalent this issue is with their children, and how young their children can be targeted at this age.
And just helping them understand their worth, because if you're not talking to them about it, they're learning it through social media. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's an article that I think she just turned 16. So she was out of Australia, though, I believe. And the article is called Sweet 16 and Never Been Kissed. And she went on to say that all of the boys are on social or online and social media. And there's all these horrific, because now think about, I don't know how old you are. I'm clearly much older, but
I'm 38. You're not that much
when
older.
I'm so old. But like back in our day, there was airbrushed Playboy. If you wanted to get really graphic, there was Hustler. It was not a lot of, like, you couldn't find crazy porn like that. And now today, this girl's article said boys are going online, and when they download any word with porn, that's what they're seeing, and they think that's what sex is. And all the boys do is ask us to play these roles out with them. So she said, I've been used in
Wow.
many ways, and I've been used for sex. And I said yes and gave myself, but I'm sweet 16 and never been kissed.
My goodness. That's terrible.
That is the world the enemy is cultivating for our children if we are not willing to speak
Mm,
up.
mm, mm, mm. Well, Elizabeth, this has been a tremendous conversation and super interesting. I love what you're doing. I mean, you've got a great heart about you, so please keep doing what you're doing. But we're winding down a little bit here. I end all of my podcasts with this one simple question that's actually two questions, and I ask everybody, and generally I get a pause because they haven't thought about it as much as they thought they have. But what was the last goal that you completed, and what's the next goal that you want to set?
The last goal that I completed,
Pause. Haha.
yeah, I think it would be tied to saying yes to start promoting my Free with E. Like, I was a ministry girl, and then the last 10 years when we launched Selah, we sort of launched it not faith-based initially the first 10 years, and I went underground. We were the stealth. Our girls still got baptized, but they chose it on their own. But now 10 years later, running the foundation, and with my book coming out through the Christian arm, who saw that coming, um, I started marketing. So that's my most recent goal. I started marketing my own platform and story, because it does bring freedom, and it's not about me. But I mean, I was a big obstacle. I'm going to tell you, I cleared that one in
Well,
March.
yeah, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. If you look, you could even see it if you look at my social media. March, I sort of came out.
Going strong. Going
Like,
strong. I love it.
took a long time, but that was a big one.
What's the next goal that you want to set for yourself? What are you thinking?
Well, what I really want to do is I have a really great team, and my calling, I do feel like my calling is to the church. I feel like my calling is to believers, and I believe that the church is asleep at the wheel. And I was sitting at my church. I go to a lot of churches, so no one will know what church I
Sure.
was sitting at, right? Everyone thinks I go to their church, but they were doing like a youth Sunday where the next gen was presenting everything, and they were interviewing a girl. She's probably just out of high school maybe, and she was saying, I had a really tough life, tough youth. I was physically abused, sexually abused. I'm like, wow, they said sexually abused. The church doesn't really say sexually abused. And she went on to talk about her anxiety, her depression, and then when they brought her out on stage live and everyone like applauded, she was on a video, then she came out live, they went in depth about her depression. And I'm like, you had so many people sitting in the audience that were like, is the church going to talk about this? Because you got 1 out of 3 girls and 1 out of 5 boys sitting in the church that don't know what to do with the fact that they're being abused. And so we are putting together a really cool program for the church, because I called my pastor's wife and I said, you missed it. She goes, I know. She goes, can you help me? I said, yes, we're in the process of building something. So I hope to awaken the church and protect the next generation and really have some specific awesome ways and tools.
Wow. Well, I will definitely be praying for you. I think I am 100% behind what you're doing. And you clearly have a heart for it, and you are the person to lead the way. So I'm very excited for what's coming in your future. I think you just stay strong. I mean, you're really doing a great thing. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a super busy person, and I mean, this has been great. I think there's definitely somebody that's going to get a lot of information from this. So, how can people get a hold of you one more time? Do you have social media as
Yeah.
well as your website?
Yeah. I think the easiest thing to remember is free, FREE, with, just like it sounds, WITHE. So for Elizabeth, freewithe.com. And on that freewithe.com, you could go to the Sail Away Foundation and learn about what we're doing there. You could go to the groups and learn about what we're doing there. You can go to my book and learn about what's there. There's lots of reviews. So Free with E is sort of the portal to the parent resources of, oh my gosh, now what I do for my child. So freewithe.com, we have everything right there for you to bring you into whatever you need.
Fantastic. Well, Misfits, go check her out. I mean, you will not be disappointed. This was a fantastic conversation, and she's just got a ton of information to inform you. I mean, this is a movement that needs to be focused on.
Yeah.
So, thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time, and you have a great evening. Okay.
You are the best. Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.